Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I know it's pretty loud in the conference center. You guys can hear me okay at the back? Yeah? Okay, fantastic. So firstly, I want to thank you all for choosing to spend your time with me. We're going to hang out for the next 30 minutes, and I know there is a lot of fantastic speakers, so I'm very grateful that you've chosen to spend the time with me. My name is Niamh Slater, and I head up the customer success team for LinkedIn Learning. So we have the privilege of working with a lot of different customers of all shapes and sizes to help them embed LinkedIn Learning into their organizations. And for me, I reckon I have the luckiest job in the world, so it's an opportunity for me to partner not only around the change management and preparing people for change, but also around learning. The passion for learning was instilled in me as a very small child. My mum has a ferocious appetite for learning, so even though she didn't finish school, she was always reading and learning and taking courses, and that for me inspired me to say, you don't need to be academic to be able to learn. So I'm always grateful to talk to people who've dedicated their lives to helping people learn. So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes talking about our workplace learning report. And some of you might be saying, what is the workplace learning report? It's an opportunity for us to go out into the L&D industry and understand what's top of mind. What are some of the challenges we're seeing? How is it showing up? And what are you thinking about for 2020 and beyond? What I can share with you is that this is actually a world exclusive. So the report is not being published until the 3rd of March. And I was really grateful to have the opportunity to share the findings with you before its publication. So if you've gotten a copy of the summary, hang on to it because it's not available just yet. So we spoke to almost 7,000 learning professionals, managers and learners across 18 different countries. But for the purpose of today, I'm going to talk just about specifically the data we saw for the UK market, because I feel it will be most relevant for us. So what did we see? The key takeaway from the conversations that we saw was that it's all about finding balance. How do I balance the demands of today? And it's a really challenging job to try and help people be successful with what they're trying to do today. But then also balancing that with what's coming down the line. What are they going to need? What are my employees going to need in 3-5 years' time when we think about how rapidly skills are evolving? And finding that balance was really what was top of mind for everyone that we spoke to. So when we parsed out the data, we really saw 4 key trends emerge, and they're going to help us answer 4 questions today. One is, how are you set up to scale learning across your business? Number 2, how do you measure the impact of the learning that you're investing in? 3, how do we activate managers and turn them into champions? And lastly, the digital transformation. How are your peers preparing for upskilling and reskilling for what's coming down the line and what I'd argue is already upon us? So let's get into it. How do we scale? The idea of doing more with less as a learning professional, I know that you all feel it. It's something that you're challenged with all the time, and I don't think that's going to stop. How can you continue to do more with less? And because of that, what we're seeing is that budgets are starting to shift online. And like I said, this report we've done for the last 4 years, and it's a trend that we've seen time and time again. So interesting to see that again this year, people are moving their budgets online. And it makes sense because online is one of the most powerful ways for us to scale learning across different roles, different regions, different skill sets, and really meet the learner where they are. So when we dug into it, what we saw was 38% of the L&D professionals we spoke to are intending to spend less on instructor-led training this year. And I want to make sure we don't misinterpret this data point to devalue the highly talented facilitators that we have in our organizations. It's more about making sure that when we do utilize them, the time they're spending is really valuable. And they're not investing their time on level setting of people in a classroom. That can be done before they walk into the classroom. And when we couple that with the idea that 54% plan to spend more online, that makes sense because it's going to help build out really robust blended learning programs. And secondly, it's the opportunity to meet the learner where they are, in what they want to learn and how they want to learn as well. What was really interesting when we were having this conversation around budgets and where people were spending them is this idea of how do we get executive buy-in. And the idea that we can get executive buy-in is pretty clear. So 84% of the people we spoke to have said getting executive buy-in is not a problem. And I see this time again with the customers that we've the opportunity to work with. When we're launching LinkedIn Learning, the executive sponsor might be there in the meeting and they're excited, they found the budget, but we mightn't see them again for 12 months. So is that true executive sponsorship? The question remains. Because when we asked, 28% of the people have said they don't believe their CEO is an active participant in championing learning. So we dug in a little more. And we said, how much time are you spending with your executives to bring them up to speed on what it means to champion learning? And about 9% was the average answer that we saw. So I think that leads us to the idea that as the L&D experts in the organization, it's up to you to help your executive understand what does it mean to be a champion. It's not enough just to get the budget and say you sponsor it and maybe send out an email. It's very much about being active in it, and we've got to guide them and tell them what we need. So something I get asked almost every day is, what are you doing at LinkedIn? What does that look like? So I thought I'd share a little bit about what we're doing. This is Kevin Delaney, he's our VP of L&D. And him and his team have done Trojan work at understanding our executives and really getting them bought into our L&D culture. And one of the ways he did that, and his team did that, is they really leaned in to understand our executives and what has made them so successful. What is it that's unique about them that's made them really successful? And then we've built out content. So on LinkedIn Learning, you can get content from some of our top executives and understand what is it about them and what they're bringing that's made them so successful. And a really powerful manifestation of executive championship within our own business is this LinkedIn Learning Challenge. So it's become an annual thing that we do, and Kevin and his team came up with the idea. And they went to Jeff and the C-suite and they said, we want to run a learning challenge across 13,000 employees globally, and we want you to kick it off. So what they did is they said, we're going to pit the sales org against the engineering org against finance, and CFO, we're going to help you create a custom learning path, and you're going to make a pledge and say, this is what I'm learning this week, and you're going to share that out with your directs. And then the VPs did that with their directors, and the directors to managers and frontline. And what we saw was a really quick cascade, and a real buzz was created within the matter of a couple of days about what are you learning, and sales are ahead of finance, and engineering should be the ones that are leading it. But we kept it at that business unit level. We didn't get down into individual teams. And what we saw at the end of the week was some really phenomenal stats in terms of engagement with LinkedIn Learning Platform. And one of the real things that I want to call out that just reinforce this idea of the power of our executives, one is we saw an uptick of consumption of custom content by 365%. That's a phenomenal increase to see in 1 week. But when we looked at that content, we saw that these 3 courses I've shared with you here, that's Jeff, our CEO, Erica, the head of engineering, and Tomer, the head of product, they were the top 3 watched courses. Because as people in our careers, we're aspiring to be the people that we see above us and leading an organization. So absolutely, I want to learn what you're learning, and I want to hear what you have to say. And the thing I want you to take away from this is not the statistics, but it's how simple of an idea that was. It wasn't overly engineered, it was super simplistic, and the team were really clear of the ask. As the C-suite, this is what we want you to do. Here's the email template. Let's build out the learning path. And because it was relevant, and the CFO to the director of finance down into the team in finance, it was specific to their business line, and they cared about it because they knew the people above them had made the same pledge. So, we've gotten budget. We're looking at moving it online. How do we measure it? I think more and more this idea of learning for learning's sake is not enough. We're all being asked to bring the data, bring the insights, what impact are you having on the business? And this was really top of mind for everybody that we spoke to. But what was really clear is that there was no one size fits all. How everybody was measuring impact looked really, really different. And that makes sense, right? Because what you're trying to do is very different depending on your organization and where you are in that journey of learning. So there is no one size fits all. So when we looked at something that was really clear, it's the idea around what was the priority. And the priority for everyone we spoke to is we want to get engaged learners. If I can get engaged learners, that means what I'm doing is working. And interesting enough, what also emerged in the UK is that I want to understand the skills gaps that was in my organization, and I also want to know how to close it. And I'm going to come back to that a little later, but for now we're going to talk a little bit more about measuring the impact of learning. So the statistics you can see here, these were the top 5 most consistently used statistic across the people we spoke to. And what's more interesting to me is when you look at it, right, we're looking at how do we measure the impact of online learning. 3 of those data points are qualitative. So what that says to me is that it doesn't matter what the program is, how digital it is, how advanced it is, the experience of the learner is always going to be number 1, and understanding was that a worthwhile investment of your time will always matter. And that was really stood out to me. So when we dug in and we said, okay, let's talk about engaged learners, what does that mean to you and how do you measure that when you're looking at your online platform? Interestingly enough, 24% of the people we spoke to do not use online data to measure engaged learners. I suspect they're leaning purely on the qualitative. But those who are using online data, you can see here the stack rank of the 4 data points that they look at in terms of what does it mean to have an engaged learner. But what was really interesting is that the people we were speaking to, they said, yeah, to me it's course completion. To me it's time spent. So it differed. But it sparked a couple of questions for me. Is a one-size-fit-all when we think about impact of an online program the right way to go? And I'm going to share a couple of examples for you as we work through these questions. Let's take course completion as an example. It makes sense. If I've completed the course, I'm engaged. But does it always make sense? Let's think about our new hire onboarding program. A lot of people, that's how they bring them into the organization. There's a clear path that you have to complete before maybe going into an in-classroom experience. Yes, course completion makes sense there, because if you're not completing the course as a new hire, then something's breaking down, and that is a sign of an engaged learner in that instance. But if I reflect on a learning moment I had just last week, we are in the middle of headcount planning for the team, and I was pulling together a report for my director. And I was in Excel, and I wanted to pull out a pivot table, and I just couldn't remember. I don't live and breathe in Excel. It's something I dip in and out of from time to time. So I went to LinkedIn Learning, pulled up an Excel course, and I went straight to the pivot table section. I think the video I watched was about 90 seconds. I got what I needed. It refreshed my memory. I went back into Excel, finished my beautiful pivot tables, and I sent them off to my director. Now, if you had looked at course completion, it would have looked like that was a failed learning experience, because what the data would have said to you is, I started a course and I abandoned it after a couple of minutes. It's not working. But really, that was such an impactful moment for me. I had something I didn't understand, I found it super quickly, and I utilized the learning I had in that moment. So absolutely it worked. So that's where we really need to think about, and what are we measuring, and is it the right thing for what I'm trying to achieve? So then we move on to the idea of minutes of learning. Again, super logical. If I'm spending time on the platform, it means I'm engaged and I'm active participant in learning. But again, does that always make sense? And I would argue that no. You need to think about, are you trying to develop a brand new skill set? Then yes, you should be spending more time because it's something net new to me. But if your organization or the teams you're working with, if they're only looking to brush up and evolve on the skills that they've already got, then time spent isn't a good reflection of how engaged they are with learning. They're only ever going to need a small percentage of developing a new skill. And the last one is this idea of return visits. It's the least used data point for people when they're thinking about engaged learners. And I really had to pause when I saw the data for the first time and say, why? As an ex-marketer, when we were building platforms and apps and everything else, it was really important to us that people were coming back to the platform. That's how we knew they were engaged and what we built worked. So why isn't that the same for learning? And if the thing that you're trying to think about is how do I engage my learners and are they engaged, then I think we need to look at return visits a lot more than we are already. And the thing I want you to take away from measuring impact and what that means is that it's not about what you're measuring. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that you understand the objective and you can join the dots and have a clear conversation with your executives when you're going back to talk about programs. So if we know that qualitative is always going to be really, really important, And if we know that the quantitative data we have is going to vary and it depends on what we're doing and what we're looking at, how else can we talk about engaged learners, and how else can we demonstrate that what we're doing is working? So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of social validation. As LinkedIn Learning, social is in our DNA. We understand the impact of the social network and that peer-to-peer conversation, so it's embedded in everything that we do. And I want you to take and think about for a moment, let's say that I'm really interested in mobile application and I want to learn and understand more about it. Imagine I can go out into my professional network and I can say, show me the people who are validated experts in mobile application. And I can look at their LinkedIn profile and I can see they've taken these courses, maybe they've published content, or maybe even I can reach out and ask for advice and recommendation around how do I up-level myself in this area. It's a really powerful thing because one, it lets me know that what I'm learning is relevant and it's coming from experts. And two, for the person who's trying to position themselves as an expert, that's really validating for them because people are seeking out advice to say, I see you as an expert and I want your input. The second thing I want to talk about is assessments. It's been part of L&D for a really long time, making sure that we assess that it's learning and has the knowledge sunk in. But when we think about engaged learners and how we can socialize assessments, if I'm taking a course online and I take my assessment and it says, congratulations, here's your certificate, I can share that out on my LinkedIn network. Does that mean I'm engaged? Absolutely, because I think the content I've just taken reinforces where I'm positioning myself as a professional, and I want to share that out on my network so people understand where I am. So we need to think about the opportunity we have with online platforms, that it's not really about qualitative and quantitative. We can start to think about other ways to think about engaged learners and therefore demonstrate impact. So that leads us on to our managers. I'm sure a lot of you sitting here today know and understand the power of a frontline manager when it comes to rolling out any program that you're trying to do. So there's you as the professional, you've got your executive sponsorship and buy-in, and now you need your frontline managers to really make this impactful and make sure that the end learners are engaged in using what you're doing. Because it doesn't matter how good you are as an L&D professional, you can't be all things to all people, and you can't be everywhere all of the time. So we need to think about leveraging these managers to become champions. And when we spoke to learners themselves, a really clear message came out, and that is that they care about what their managers are saying. They want to understand what their managers are learning, because that's a big indication for them about what's a priority. And if I want to be a manager, it's also an indication of what I should be learning. So when we looked at this a little bit more, what was interesting is 48% of people said, I don't have time for learning. And I'm sure you hear it all of the time. I don't have time. And what we know is that it's rarely about time, because nobody has time anymore. Everybody is busy. When we looked at our own data around LinkedIn Learning, we were able to see that 83% of learning is happening during the work week. So what does that tell us? That tells us that if people are given the time, they will invest it in learning and they will help themselves progress in their careers. And those same 48% of people who said they didn't have time, they said, well, if it was a relevant recommendation from my manager that was going to help my career, I'd probably make time. So then that brings us on to this idea of how do we create relevance? And the manager is really the best placed person to create relevance, because they know my career aspirations, they understand where there's gaps in performance. But you all already know this, because 84% have already said that I proactively engage my frontline managers when I'm trying to roll out a program. And the employees get it, because 48% have said, I want my manager to recommend it to me. And if they do so, I'll engage. And then 88% of managers themselves said they get it. They understand that L&D helps drive happiness and engagement, and therefore their teams are going to be more successful. So if you get it, and people want recommendations from their managers, and the managers are bought in, then the next question is, what can we do? And I want to share two tactics with you that I've seen work really, really well among our customers. The first is show what your managers are learning. So one way I talked about at the start was this idea of the LinkedIn Learning Challenge, where we made a pledge and everyone shared out what they were learning. But another less overt way to think about that is leveraging the LinkedIn network. So on LinkedIn Learning, when I complete a course, I can share it out with my network and I can say, I just finished this, I found it really interesting, or here's what I'm going to apply. And that can be really powerful. An example I want to share is a customer that we were working with a few months back. And we'd rolled out LinkedIn Learning across the organization. And activation rates were growing and creeping up as we'd expect them to be. But there was a huge spike in engagement really early on in one of the teams. So we dug into the data and we understood that that was a sales team. So for anyone who works with sales teams, you'll know they're rarely the first people to put their hand up or the first people to get finished their learning. And we really wanted to understand what this particular team was doing. As it transpired, the manager was already a user of LinkedIn Learning, and in 2019 she had made a pledge that I'm going to take a course a month. This wasn't to her team, this was her as a professional out on her network. So every month she would share out a course and say, I've just watched this, I found this really interesting, and I'm holding myself accountable to try this new way of working. So when the company had bought it for the organization, she started to bring that into the conversation. So she knew her team were seeing it on LinkedIn already. And then she started to bring it up in team meetings to say, I just finished this course, I found it really interesting, negotiation skills, and I'm going to try this in the next conversation I have with a customer. And what we saw is without that manager saying, you have to do, the engagement with the content had spiked far beyond the rest of the organization. And I think it reinforces how powerful it can be just to share and lead by example. The second thing I want to talk about that we've seen huge success with is this idea of learner groups. So on LinkedIn Learning, you can build out a learning group around a particular course or a particular learning path. And oftentimes it's the L&D professional that's setting these up and inviting people in. And you get pretty good engagement. But where our customers have leaned into managers and had them be the one to facilitate the conversation and invite the team members in, we've seen the engagement rates 2-3 times X what we do otherwise when it's L&D. So there's real opportunity, and again, I think the point I want you to take away is that managers are keen and they understand the value of L&D, and what they're often looking for is guidance. Give me some tactics and tell me what I can do to drive this with my team. So this leads us to our last point around digital transformation. It's an area I've been working in for a number of years before joining LinkedIn, and it's kind of a buzzword that's been going around the houses for a few years. But I think this is the first year that we're starting to see such drastic change and impact in what this digital transformation is meaning for people in their roles, in their careers. So what we looked at is this idea of the reskilling and upskilling revolution. People are saying it's 3 to 5 years down the road, but the reality is that it's already here. And what the report has shown us is that not only is it already here and that L&D professionals are thinking about it right now, what we're seeing is above anything else, soft skills are reigning supreme. So you might think when it comes to digital, I got to learn how to code and I don't understand mobile development, but actually it's the soft skills and the things that make us human beings, our empathy, our creativity. No matter how good the robots get, they cannot replicate that and replace it. So more than ever, we need to lean into those soft skills that's going to guide us. If my role changes, if I have to move into another industry, it's my soft skills that are going to take me there. So when we looked at some of the data and we asked, what's most important to you when you're thinking about this reskilling and upskilling? And 55% of the people said to us, if you could tell us what are the most in-demand skills that we're going to need in the next 3 to 5 years, it's the #1 most valuable piece of information I need as an L&D professional. And then secondary to that, we see that 52% of people plan to have an upskilling program in their organization in 2020. And my hope is that the other 48% started last year and that we're already ahead of the game. And the final thing that came out for us is this idea that 40% anticipate that they're going to have a reskilling program in 2020. And that really gave me a sobering moment, because what that means is 40% of the people that we spoke to anticipate jobs within their organizations are either going to be redundant or change so drastically that they need to completely reskill those individuals in those teams. So if ever there was a data point to tell us that this idea of reskilling revolution, it's here and it's no longer a futuristic idea. So then we dug in and we asked, okay, well, for these programs, what are you thinking about? What's top of mind and what are the skills that you're looking at? And you can see here the top 3 skills are all soft skills: leadership, creative problem solving, communication. And the skills that are of least importance are some of the harder skills around coding and computing. And it might seem counterintuitive when we're talking about a digital transformation and a digital revolution, but it makes sense because the idea of coding, it's not easy, it's far beyond my capabilities, but it's black and white. And there's clear path for you to how do I become a CSS code developer. You can go on a journey and it's really black and white. But how do I become a really impactful leader? Or how do I develop creative problem solving? That's more complex. And that's where L&D people need to really lean in, and that's where your expertise is needed. How do I build out these soft skills? And I'll share a story as a hiring manager, how important these are in today's job environment. I had 2 months ago, I was hiring for a new role on my team, and I had 2 candidates who got to the final round. We do a role play panel as your last round, and really that's an opportunity to bring out some of these softer skills and see how you think about problems given to you. So the 2 candidates that I had, one was more tenured and had more skills than I was looking for. But the second person had a really interesting profile and had some of the skills that I was looking for. But they'd interviewed really well, so these 2 people got to the final round panel. After that, myself and the 3 other people in the 2 interviews, we debriefed, and the second person, who was less tenured and didn't meet all the criteria for the role I was hiring for, got the job. And why did they get the job? They absolutely nailed the brief we gave them, which is purposefully vague because we want to understand how you think creatively. And secondly, they managed that room so well. They were able to interact and communicate their ideas, deal with the tough persona and the softer persona in the room. And that is the thing that got them to roll. And I know for every future role I'm hiring, it's going to be the thing that's going to differentiate you when I'm bringing you into the team. So then we think about the idea that a lot of the conversations we were having with L&D was like, yeah, we think leadership's really important and we're seeing a gap and that's what we're looking at. But what if you didn't have to look into your crystal ball? What if we had actual hard data that could tell you what are the skills gaps and what are the skills that are coming? Well, the good news is that we can. So as LinkedIn and someone working in LinkedIn, I'm extremely grateful because a lot of the work that we're doing is going to fuel the development of our economic graph. And this is often less front and center when you hear about LinkedIn. But this is where we're taking the data from 675 million people globally, and we're building out a digital representation of our economy. And the reason we're doing that is because the whole purpose of LinkedIn is the ability to create economic opportunity for every member of the workforce, regardless of the school you went to or the place you come from. So one of the reports that fall out of the economic graph and the phenomenally talented data scientists that we have working on it is this annual most in-demand skills. Some of you may have already seen this on LinkedIn. If you didn't, I posted it a couple of weeks back, so you can go ahead and have a look at it there. But every year we look at the data on LinkedIn, we look at the trends of what people are hiring for, and we build out the most in-demand skills. So again, we can see most in demand are soft skills. They're continuing to be really, really important. But I want to call out a couple of things. One is emotional intelligence that I've highlighted there in number 5. That did not exist on our list last year. It wasn't number 78, it wasn't anywhere on the list, and now it's the top 5 most sought after soft skill. And why is that? I think emotional intelligence is a thing that kind of was being talked about for a couple of years, but what we're starting to understand is it's actually a skill, and a skill that I want to hire for because I know it's going to help you be successful. And then when we look at the harder skills, I want to talk about some of the shifts that we've seen. So again, number 1 up there is blockchain as a skills development, what people are looking for. That did not exist on our report last year. So it wasn't even on anyone's radar a couple of years ago, and now it's the number 1 most sought after skill. that is frightening when we think about how rapidly the economy is changing and how rapidly we're looking at things. So the purpose of sharing this is not to frighten you, it's to talk about how quickly things are changing, and more importantly, what can you do as L&D professionals? So one of the first things that we can do is you can really think about what are the trends around soft skills? How do I understand what soft skills are needed in my organization? And there's lots of different ways you can do it. One is around the report, the in-demand skills report. There's lots of different places that you can get insight. But on LinkedIn Learning, something we do that helps you stay ahead is, one, we'll surface up what are the most popular courses across all of our customers. So one within your organization, but one across all our customers. And the second thing is around the idea of featured content and courses. They're created off the back of what we're seeing trending in terms of skills demands in the marketplace, and that's what we're using to fuel our content strategy. So it's really important that you're thinking about not soft skills as a standalone and people need them and they don't. It's how do I weave them into the different programs I have, because whether you're in IT or engineering, it doesn't matter. Soft skills are so important to making sure you're prepared for what's ahead. The other thing that we need to think about is oftentimes these really in-demand skills that we're trying to hire in or build out in our organization, they're really hard to attract. So I want to share this as an example. Data scientists. Anyone in the audience who's trying to get data scientists into your organization, my sincere sympathies, because it's gold dust unicorn stuff. They are so expensive, there's very few of them, and it's really hard to go out into the market and buy them into the organization. So something that my team does as customer success is we partner with our customers to say, what are some of these roles that you're looking to get into your organization? And let's take data science as an example. We can use LinkedIn data to show you what skills you already have within your organization, and then we can use that as a starting point. So you might not have a data scientist in your organization, but you probably have a few data analysts. Some people call them business analysts. And what's interesting is that the overlap of skill sets is about 40 to 50% very similar skills. But what we also know is that there's a number of skills that they don't have. But that's going to take them from being a data analyst to a data scientist. And being able to understand that and being able to build out a program to get people from point A to point B is really powerful for two reasons. So one, the aforementioned really expensive unicorn that you can't buy into your organization. It's a cost-effective way to build out those roles that you know you're going to need next year and the year after. But the second thing it does is it's a really powerful approach when you think about employee engagement. So if I'm a data analyst in your organization and I can see my peers around me are getting put on paths and that there's a road for me to become a data scientist, I'm more bought into the company, I'm working hard, and I want to get promoted and I want to get put on that program because that is an aspiration of mine. So it's not only about just purely filling skills gaps, it's also about the idea of like, how do we keep employees engaged? So what's been really interesting as we look at the data that came out of the report, and it's the 4th year that we've done it, is the journey that L&D has come on. So 10+ years ago, it was all about trainers and compliance. And now we've got CLOs who are sitting at the C-suite driving business strategy. And you think about what we shared today, right? One, L&D, you need to tell your executives how to actively champion learning. 2, you need to talk about data and impact and come with those numbers. 3, you need to get out into the organization and get the manager buy-in and tell them how they can champion learning. And lastly, you're helping your organization stay in existence in 5 years, because if they're not working on those skills gaps and they're not thinking about what's going to be in demand in 5 years' time, they're going to be out of business. And that's been a seismic shift in terms of the role of L&D. And the thing that I want to leave you with is this idea that the more we think ahead and we're thinking 3-5 years down the road, the more I know that L&D are going to be prepared for anything the 2020s is going to bring to us. And with that, I want to thank you all so much for your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation. A couple of things before we go. One, some of you would have gotten a copy of the summary report. Hang on to it. If you didn't, we're over at booth N35 and you can go to get a copy there. And my colleagues in the blue shirts would be more than happy to chat to you about anything we shared today. Secondly, I'm going to hang around for a while, so if anyone has any more questions, please come and say hi. I'd absolutely love to talk to you more. So thank you so much and have a great rest of the day.